Hello, and welcome to this introductory training module for estimating and bidding. This is an approximately 1 hour long course sponsored by the North Dakota DOT DBE Supportive Services Program, which will provide a basic understanding of the processes involved with calculating an estimate and bidding a project with the North Dakota DOT. Project Solutions, Inc., PSI, has been contracted with the North Dakota DOT since 2015 to provide business training and one-to-one consulting. We look forward to working with you to build your business using strategies that work. Why do you need a good bid process? It's a commonly known fact that most businesses fail within 3 years of being established, and that the average business owner will fail the first 2 times they start a business. According to the American Association of Cost Engineers, construction firms make up about 8% of all businesses in the United States, yet constitute 17% of all business failures. New businesses fail at an alarming rate, and new construction businesses fail at an even greater rate. Why do construction firms fail so often? There are many reasons, but most of the time it is due to poor estimates. The lifeblood of construction firms is through profits based off bids or negotiations. The quality of a bid is dependent on the quality of the estimate behind the bid. Estimates that are too high leave a company uncompetitive in a bid, and estimates that are too low leave a company unable to make a profit. Before we get started, let's go over the difference between an estimate, a quote, and a bid. Contractors use estimates to calculate their expected costs to complete a project. Specifications for a project are analyzed to determine the raw materials and labor required, and the contractor then solicits quotes from suppliers for the raw materials. Overhead charges are also typically included in an estimate. A quote is a figure that a contractor gets from a supplier for the price of materials. Another example may be excavation services. Quotes are often good for a certain length of time. Costs may vary depending on the price of diesel. Outside the given time frame, the price of materials may change. Quotes expired in construction may refer to a document that offers to perform a specific job at a specific price within a certain period of time. A good example of this is lumber. It may also refer to the suppliers are not able to just create more 2x4s if demand exceeds their expectations. This training module provides an introduction into the process of estimating a bid and shipped and the online bidding process through the North Dakota Department of Transportation. We will also discuss the additional supportive services available at no cost to certified DBEs through PSI. Detailed estimates are the estimates in which construction bids and negotiations are based upon. Once the project is underway, the detailed estimate also forms the basis for project cost control. A detailed estimate breaks a project down into each of its component elements, quantifies those elements, and then prices them out. The elements that the estimate is divided into are more or less up to the estimator. The basic rule of thumb is that if it's different, keep it separated. The steps to completing a detailed estimate are: there are about as many different methods of calculating an estimate as there are construction companies. The distinct types of estimates in use today can be categorized into a few basic styles. Order of magnitude estimates. Order of magnitude estimates are essentially ballpark figures. Construction firms most commonly use this type of estimate as a tool in the screening process when evaluating a project's desirability. They are very quick to produce and do not rely on detailed design information. The accuracy of an order of magnitude bid generally depends on the experience of the estimator. Parametric estimates. Parametric estimates are more detailed and therefore more accurate than order of magnitude estimates, but are less detailed and therefore less accurate than detailed estimates. Parametric estimates are based upon the size and scope parameters of a project. They are approximate estimates and are especially useful for highly repetitive types of projects. Often parametric estimates are used for parts of detailed estimates. Detailed estimates. Detailed estimates, also known as definitive estimates, form the backbone for the bid. the contract negotiations, and the project cost control. Detailed estimates involve quantifying all the elements involved with the scope of work and pricing out each of those elements. Depending upon the size of the project, detailed estimates are highly specialized and take a great deal of time to complete compared to other types of estimates. This estimating module discusses instructions for detailed estimates. Number 1, review the contract documents. Number 2, perform a site visit. Number 3, attend the pre-bid meeting if one is offered. Number 4, develop a bidding strategy. Number 5, solicit a prime contractor, unless bidding as prime. Number 6, notify your bonding agency. Number 7, estimate the general conditions. Number 8, perform a quantity takeoff from the plan set. Number 9, determine the units of measure. Number 10, determine the prices for each element. Number 11, estimate the labor. Number 12, estimate the equipment. Number 13, determine overhead. Number 14, determine the acceptable level of risk. Number 15, determine the markup for profit. Number 16, calculate markup for bond if applicable. And number 17, finalize your estimate. These are the basic steps used by most construction contractors. Of course, every company does their estimating a little differently, and these steps are not necessarily performed sequentially. We will cover each of these steps so that no matter what your trade, you can successfully estimate a job. Number 1, review contract documents. When preparing an estimate, the critical contract documents include specifications and drawings or plans. As a bidder, it is the responsibility of the contractor to know and understand what is included in the contract documents. The project manual, or spec book, provides instructions on how the prescribed work is to be performed, including material and equipment requirements and any restrictions or conditions on that performance, how the quality and acceptability of work will be determined, allowable tolerances and how deviations from these tolerances will be handled, how payment for the work will be made, and how changed conditions are to be handled. Because specification books are often inches thick, many contractors only read the section that affects their trade. It is imperative, however, to review all specification sections before you sign a contract. You are contractually liable for all requirements included in the complete document. The general conditions section, for example, contains contractual requirements for job site safety, submittals, cleanup, change orders, and how to get paid. Plans and drawings. Plans and drawings for a project should receive focus only after the specifications have been thoroughly examined and understood. The contractor will then have a better idea of what to look for on the drawings. Most state DOT plan sets also include estimates of quantities, which are necessary to perform a quantity takeoff. We will discuss quantity takeoffs later in this module. Number 2, perform a pre-bid site visit. This may seem obvious, but this step is often overlooked by contractors who are either inexperienced or overly confident that they know the details of a particular project. Visiting the proposed job site is critical to a successful estimate, as it may bring to light concerns that are not readily apparent in the contract documents. The following is a list of some of the items that contractors should check for when making a pre-bid site visit. Actual distance traveled from the office to the job site, and will per diem or lodging need to be provided to on-site workers? Is there adequate access to the job site, or will access roads need to be developed? From a visual inspection, what are the soil conditions? To what extent are the clearing and grubbing requirements? Is the site mostly grass and weeds, or are there a considerable number of trees? And if so, what is the average diameter of the trees? Are there nearby sources of water and power? Are telephone lines available? What about cell service and internet? Are there nearby wetlands, streams, lakes, etc. that will need to be protected? How far is the job site to an adequate waste disposal area? If additional labor will need to be hired, is there an adequate supply of labor in the area? Is equipment rental available, and how near is it? How far will contractors and suppliers need to transport materials? Are there nearby sources of concrete and lumber? What security measures will be needed for this site? Will you need traffic control and/or flagmen? Number 3, attend the pre-bid meeting if one is offered. Pre-bid meetings are gatherings scheduled after an invitation for bids or request for proposals is advertised. They are called pre-bid meetings because they are pertinent to procurement of goods, non-consultant services, and works. When they are scheduled for consulting services, they are called pre-proposal meetings. These meetings, also called conferences, are scheduled during the preparation of the solicitation documents, invitations for bids or requests for proposals, and the date, time, and venue are mentioned in these documents so that all prospective bidders and consultants can become aware of them. The objective of pre-bid meetings is to explain the details of the solicitation documents to interested bidders. Prospective bidders are permitted to request clarifications on the invitation for bids or request for proposals by a stipulated date, and then the pre-bid meeting is held within that period. Perhaps most importantly, the pre-bid meeting is where you'll meet the decision makers for the project and have an opportunity to sell yourself. Number 4, develop a bidding strategy. There are 2 ways to look at bidding and bidding strategy. The short view, or get the contract first and worry about details later, is for inexperienced bidders. Of course, some details are unforeseen and must rely on decisions made in the field, but this should be the exception and not the rule. An experienced, successful bidder will use the long-run strategy by incorporating planning into the details of the bid. Number 5, solicit a prime contractor, unless you're bidding as prime, in which case you'll need to solicit vendor or subcontractor pricing. Number 6, notify your bonding agency. Unlike prime contracts, bonds typically are not required for subcontracts by law on public works. Instead, each general contractor decides whether to require their subcontractors to bond. The general rule of thumb is a subcontract exceeding $100,000 will require a bond. However, a general contractor can make this threshold smaller or larger, depending on the scope of the subcontractor's work and the type of project. Chances are, subcontractors doing more than $100,000 on public work will eventually encounter a bond requirement. Number 7, estimate the general conditions. General conditions refer to items and costs that are directly related to the completion of the project, but that are not considered part of the completion of specific work tasks. General conditions pertain to on-site costs and should not be confused with general business overhead costs. General conditions are often referred to as job site overhead. There are many possibilities for items that may be included in general conditions for a project. It is a clever idea for a company to compile a list of possible general conditions which can be pulled from and added to with each new job. All contractors differ in what items they term as general conditions. Here is a partial list of items that may be considered general conditions for a highway project: surveying, temporary construction offices, temporary restrooms, storage structures, on-site telephones, utility bills, security fences, lighting and personnel, etc., signage, fuel and maintenance not accounted for under equipment estimations, cleanup, superintendent and other supervisory personnel, dust and noise control, transportation about the job site, and safety measures such as first aid equipment, fire equipment, etc. General conditions can be tricky to estimate. General conditions are usually included in the bid documents, but are not intended to provide a complete list. The total cost is reflected in the bid, either in the form of a line item for general conditions or as a markup for the total contract. Lack of attention to general conditions will reduce or possibly eliminate your profit when you must comply with them contractually. Number 8, perform a quantity takeoff from the plan set. The quantity takeoff, or quantity survey as it's sometimes called, provides the backbone for the detailed construction estimate. The quantity takeoff is where estimators determine the total number of individual work items to be completed, total amount of construction materials needed, etc. Examples of items that would be determined in a quantity takeoff might include cubic yards of concrete needed to construct a certain box culvert, linear feet of type 2 right-of-way fence to be installed, square footage of erosion control blankets, tons of number 4 epoxy-coated rebar. For a given highway project, there are hundreds of items that are quantified in the quantity takeoff. When performing an estimate, quantity takeoffs usually take more time than any other task that the estimate involves. Luckily for North Dakota highway contractors, the North Dakota Department of Transportation goes to great lengths to produce various tables that contain estimates of construction quantities, which they place in plan sets. Most of these estimates of quantities come from the plan and profile sheets in construction drawings. A note of caution though, when performing a quantity takeoff, do not merely reference the estimates of quantities. A careful estimator will also make a detailed reference of the plan drawings and plan notes. There are a couple reasons for this. The estimator must consider the likely sequence of operations in order to anticipate all the cost elements. Plan drawings and plan notes may contain items that are not contained in the estimates of quantities, and the drawings and notes may also display special construction conditions not found in the estimates of quantities. You cannot tell the construction conditions by merely looking at estimates of quantities. The quantities are not guaranteed to be accurate. They almost always are, but there can be exceptions, and as a contractor, you will notice cost elements that designers might not notice. The quantities listed on quantity takeoffs can be thought of as number 1, real materials such as concrete, base course, fencing, etc., or 2, aspects that require work such as finishing concrete and grading, etc. Obviously, not all quantities can be found on a plan set. Finishing concrete, for instance, is a quantifiable element that's not necessarily drawn on a plan set, but that you know needs to be done when you see an exposed slab of concrete. Elements cannot be quantified without first considering how the construction work is likely to proceed. The goal of the quantity survey is to name and separate the quantities of a project for one purpose, pricing them out. The materials and other cost elements must be separated in a logical format. Where should separation occur? If it's different, keep it separate. Good points of separation are when different measurements are used, such as square feet, square yards, etc. Different cost levels occur. Different work crews are needed, or different work operations are needed. If the quantities are wrong, the entire estimate will be wrong. Regardless of how accurate the pricing information may be, if it's not multiplied to the correct quantities, the estimate will be inaccurate. It is not easy to back-check a quantity survey. Often it is cost prohibitive to do so. Therefore, a quantity survey must be performed carefully and systematically the first time it is performed. Don't be afraid to mark up a plan set. It's not a museum piece, and if your firm is serious about performing the work, you will need multiple copies anyway. Use colored pencils to help you divide up the elements on the drawings. Follow a logical order. Complete big picture items first. Estimate each drawing in a consistent fashion. For instance, let's say you were estimating fencing. Your method may be to start in the upper left-hand corner and go in a clockwise direction, checking for all the elements that involve fencing. Do this same method for each drawing. Use decimal equivalents to make your math easier. Instead of using 2 feet 3 inches, use 2.25 feet. Do not use scratch pads. You need to be able to review your work, and you should be performing your work in sufficient detail that a scratch pad shouldn't be needed for calculation purposes. Try to visualize the method in which the construction work will progress. This will help you discover items that may not be included on the plan set, such as finishing concrete, and will help you to determine other cost control elements, such as working room. Performing a quantity takeoff is done in conjunction with step number 9. Determine the units of measure. Units of measure are usually located on the estimate of quantity sheet in the plan set, or can be determined by examining drawings and/or the project manual. Here we have a typical estimate of quantity sheet for a North Dakota DOT highway project. So we can see that as an example, this project will require approximately 26 million gallons of water to complete. Number 10. Determine prices for each element. The contractor is almost always required to provide the materials for a construction project. Material pricing is usually fairly consistent. However, unit prices should be checked against the current prices of vendors that will be used. Sources of material cost information include company records, local vendors, and cost publications such as RS Means, B&I Building News, Suites, and Walkers. Other factors that the estimator should consider when determining material costs include regional differences and availability. There are regional differences in prices for many construction materials because certain materials are more readily available in some areas than others. Southern pine lumber does not cost the same amount in North Dakota as it does in Georgia. With that in mind, it's a good idea to check your local vendors or company historical data for major purchases when performing your estimate. Another consideration, especially for rural highway projects, is the cost to transport construction materials. For instance, if the project is a small stretch of highway 40 miles from a decent-sized city, there probably aren't any concrete batch plants in the vicinity, and unit prices for ready-mix concrete will be increased. An often overlooked element of material costs is the cost incurred by contractors to store the materials. The materials will be shipped from the vendor to your site, but then what? You'll need to store those materials until you actually use them. Is there room at the job site to store materials? Usually on rural projects, there is ample space. But what if the project involves a highway through a downtown area? Do you need a staging area? Or are you going to have to time the arrival of your materials with the placement of the materials? Do you need facilities such as sheds or work boxes to store the materials? These are all factors that need to be considered. As far as how to actually consider the factors, you need to be aware of the site conditions, another important reason for the site visit. You need to contact your suppliers, and your company needs some experience performing that type of work. Many vendors will provide discounts for large orders, thus enabling you to lower your estimate. However, you must obtain this information directly from the supplier, not from cost books. As consumers, we are all familiar with sales taxes. Be sure to take possible sales taxes into account for construction purposes as well.